Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. FPL Consult here, and today we are going to review FPL Raptor's season so far. Now, I did a similar video last season for FPL Mate and FPL Focal when they were absolutely flying through the ranks, and this season it's none other than FPL Raptor Ross, who's up there at around 2k in the world right now, which is incredible. So we're going to go through his overall statistics, analyze his FPL team performance game week by game week. So if you guys do enjoy this one, please give it a like. Lots of research went into this one. I pretty much rewatched all of FPL Raptor's team selection videos to make this video, so I really appreciate any support, and of course do drop a sub as well if you haven't already. So taking a look at the graph here on the screen, we see that Ross began the season with a pretty okay start in game week 1 and set at 311k in the world. For the next couple of weeks, he had some ups and downs, but managed to get in and around the 30k bracket from game week 5 onwards, which was already a very good rank at the time, bearing in mind how many of us have lamented this season in general, that it has been quite a weird season in terms of FPL returns. Now, when he really flew up the leaderboards was in game week 9, as we can see here, moving from 23k in game week 8 to 578th in the world in game week 9. Now that's an insane 97% rank increase, and this was largely due to the wildcard he played in game week 8, which really brought in the points one game week later in game week 9. So suffice to say, he kind of nailed the picks on that game week 8 wildcard, and as we always say, you build a wildcard not for one game week, but for the long term, and that's kind of what we are seeing here with his rank steadily in the top 1k for the next 4 game weeks, and at one point he was up to 149th in the world, which was his peak rank for the season. Now, as for the last 3 game weeks, it was a little bit more rough, but in general, it's hard to maintain your rank when you're up there in those ranks. One bad game week and it can really punish you. So Ross fell to about 1.8k in the world in game week 14, clawed back to 908 in the world in game week 15, but that wasn't enough, so he ended the season, ended the first half of the season around 2k in the world. So now we take a big picture, we're taking a look at the big picture view of Ross statistics, and he accumulated a total of 1,007 points in total. Now, if we put this into perspective, based on livefpl.net statistics, out of 10 million FPL managers in the world, less than 5,000 managers have even crossed the 1,000 point mark. So that is already incredible. But what I find more remarkable actually is that he hasn't taken any hits at all this season, right? 0. So as we'll see later on, this came down to a mix of proper planning, intelligent use of transfers, and I guess a small element of good fortune. Now, Ross didn't use transfers for the sake of it, right? And he wrote the transfer where possible, which kind of prepared him well for when his players got injured, and that kind of explains why he didn't need to take a hit at all so far. So as for average points per game week, very similar to the numbers we were seeing FPL Mate and FPL Focal put up when they were at these ranks last season, right? So 67.1 points per game week is Ross's average, and that's kind of a good indication for us of what it takes to be in and around those ranks in FPL. Now, as for chips, he's only used the first wildcard chip, which is a big advantage because most of the managers in and around those crazy ranks have already used multiple chips. Some have already played their bench boost, some have even used their free hit. So this kind of puts him in a good position to overtake them in the long term. So right now we're going to do a quick run through game week by game week to analyze Ross's team and see how he navigated the first 16 game weeks of the season to arrive at this rank. So game week 1, 79 points for FPL Raptor. The start of the season seems quite a while ago now, but if we could recall Haaland scoring 2 goals against West Ham on the opening week, then that could jolt some memories for us. So team structure wise, Ross went for a pretty standard 4-4-2 formation, which was very, very common at the start of the season. He went for Diaz over Robertson, Haaland over Kane, and Bailey over Neto, and these were kind of the 50-50 calls that had to be made at the start of the season, which with the benefit of hindsight, we can say now were the right calls, right? So returns from most his defenders, his captain Salah, and of course Haaland's brace brought Ross to 311k in the world. In game week 2, Ross rolled the transfer and pretty much set up with the exact same squad, only changing captaincy to Haaland, who most of us will remember only got 1 assist even though City put 4 past Bournemouth that week. So that was quite a bummer, but even so, 78 points for Ross and up to 69k. Now the players that did not return the previous game week came good in game week 2. So Jesus with an incredible 19-pointer against Leicester, and Diaz with a goal against Palace, not forgetting a double-digit haul from Cancelo. On to Game Week 3, and the first transfer of FPL Raptor season was to bring in Pascal Gross for Leon Bailey. Now he rolled the other transfer and only managed 48 points in what was a pretty low scoring game week for all FPL managers in general. Down to 161k in the world, this game week was one to forget, as Trent and Cancelo both scored 0 points, with City conceding 3 to Newcastle and United putting 2 past Liverpool. Now on the bright side, he captained Salah, who scored in Liverpool's only goal against United, and his transfer to bring Pascal Gross in worked out pretty well as well, Gross getting an assist immediately. Fast forward to Game Week 4 and up into the top 100k again, this time thanks to a very healthy score of 80 points. Now, Ross made a bench move and took Archer out for Stansfield, who at the time seemed like he was going to get a run in the Fulham side, right? And then he rolled the other transfer as well. So hauls from Trent, Diaz, Pascal Gross, Haaland, all helped his cause, and once again, if we focus on the starting 11, we'll realize that actually it hasn't changed much at all. The only change to the starting 11 was Pascal Gross for Bailey, as we saw last week already. So Ross's starting strategy mainly surrounded having a well-balanced team that is able to ride through a good couple of game weeks without needing too many changes, and looking at it now, it seems like he kind of nailed those core picks, which enabled him to roll transfers and even make bench changes. So on to Game Week 5 and up the ranks again. This time he halved his rank to 31k, and for the first time this season he made a double change, removing Andreas Pereira and an injured Reece James for Estupiñán and Harrison. So he scored 86 points in Game Week 5, and though his changes did not produce a lot of points immediately, we see once again that the core players of his team, Cancelo, Salah, Martinelli, Haaland, Jesus, all still had very decent outings, and once again highlights the importance of having a good group of core players, which then opens up the possibility of taking a couple of calculated punts, as we saw here in Game Week 5. Game Week 6 did not bring too many changes in terms of rank for Ross, and points wise it was a low scoring game week in general, so to score 48 points was kind of enough to maintain the rank. Now this week was the week where we had a couple of upsets, with Villa holding City to a draw, United winning Arsenal 3-1, and Liverpool being held to a draw at Everton as well. So overall, not too many FPL points to go around, but as we all know, there will be these kind of weeks in FPL, and sometimes it is about riding it out, and that's exactly what we see here. Majority of the points here were from Trippier and Haaland, which was just enough to ride Game Week 6 out. Jumping to Game Week 8 now, because Game Week 7 was postponed entirely due to the Queen's passing. So Ross played his wildcard in Game Week 8, and this was the only chip that he's used this season. So I kind of want to analyze this wildcard a little bit and spend some time here. So in terms of key decisions, the main one surrounding this wildcard for Ross was whether to go for Kane plus Foden or KDB plus Isak. Now there was good reason to go with either side, both had their pros and cons, and in the end, Ross went with Kane and Foden. So at the time, with the benefit of hindsight and looking at most people's teams in the end, this was not the popular choice at the time. I think a lot of people went with the KDB and Isak option because it kind of gave an easy route to Salah later on, and Isak was also kind of like the shiny new toy. So Ross felt like this was something that he could cover in 2 transfers later on, right? So Salah wasn't too far away. He could still get to Salah if he wanted to. So he trusted his judgment and went with Kane plus Foden, bearing in mind that Foden was actually a placeholder for Zaha in Game Week 10 or 11. Now, just to touch on some of the other picks as well, Ross did receive quite a lot of stick for including the likes of Bowen and Maddison in his wildcard team, and in his team selection video for Game Week 8, he did have to do quite a bit of justification as to why he was going for these players, because their data really wasn't good at the time. So once again, massive props to him for not doing what was popular, but rather trusting his own judgment and a little bit of gut feel as well. So now that we have some context surrounding the wildcard, and moving on now, right, to how he actually scored in Game Week 8, it turned out pretty well. Right, Kane and Foden both returned, and remember this was the key decision. And add to this as well, Maddison scored an incredible goal, right, against Spurs in Leicester's 6-2 loss. So 7 points for him, right, and 62 points on the whole was kind of enough to give Ross a small green arrow up to 23k in the world. Game week 9 now, and this was the week that City put 6 past United, but it was also the week that kind of did it for Ross. So 119 points in total, ridiculous returns from all around, right? Bearing in mind that this was the exact same team from the Game week 8 wildcard because Ross rolled his transfer in Game week 9. So you had the exact same 15-man squad, and this team really came to life in Game week 9, right? Mega hauls for Maddison and Bowen, as well as a hat-trick for Foden and Haaland. So safe to say Ross was in dreamland with a game week rank of 7.7k, which is insane, and this took him up to 578th in the world. Now, it is worth noting at this point that all three of those midfielders who kind of hauled this game week in Game week 9 were on really low ownerships too. So this was kind of what enabled Ross to really shoot up the ranks. Now on to Game week 10, where Ross peaked at 149th in the world. This was his highest rank ever this season. So he made one transfer to bring Castagna in for Salisu and rolled the other free transfer. Now, returns did not stop coming, right? And the points from pretty much all 8 of his starting 11 players kind of gave Ross 85 points in Game week 10. Now, double digits from Cancelo, Foden, Martinelli, sprinkled with some 7-pointers from Kane, Bowen, Trippier, and the new addition Castagna as well, all helped his cause and brought him to the highest point of his season so far. Breezing through a little quicker these next couple of game weeks, Game week 11 was a small red arrow for Ross, and by this point I think it is worth mentioning that green arrows would be really hard to come by week after week, solely because of the nature of being so high up the ranks. Now, small red arrows would be something of a common theme in the next couple of game weeks, but it is something that's kind of part of the process of being in these kind of ranks. So, Game week 11, 49 points, and unfortunately he left a lot of points on the bench this game week, but realistically looking at the fixtures for game week 11, I don't think he would have started any of the bench players ahead of the starting 11, so it was kind of one of those game weeks, right? And returns from Kane and Mitrovic together with a couple of clean sheet points from the defense was enough to cushion the red arrow, and he dropped to 194th in the world. On to Game week 12 now, and this was only the second time that Ross made a double change this season, going heavy on Liverpool and bringing in Salah and Firmino for Maddison and Kane. Now, this was the game week that Arsenal and City both had a blank game week, and one that I think Ross was pretty alright to take a red arrow from, given that he only started with 10 playing players. Now, some weeks it is about managing the game week and getting by, and this was one of those game weeks. Unfortunately for Ross, the Liverpool boys didn't manage to return against West Ham, and to add to this, Bowen missed a penalty in that same match as well. So to come away with 40 points and a red arrow to 715th in the world was not the worst thing that could have happened. It is worth pointing out as well that Castagna and Trippier were still returning very consistently for Ross throughout this period, pulling in some very decent points. For Game week 13, Ross rolled the transfer this week, and we will remember this one as the week where Liverpool lost 1-0 to Forest, which did not come down well for FPL Raptor at all, given that he had Salah and Firmino. But a massive return from Castagna, who we will remember was only brought in a couple of weeks ago, was really helpful. Now, he got an assist and 3 bonus points in Leicester's 4-0 win against Wolves. Other than that though, a Haaland captain return didn't really do much rank-wise given his effective ownership, so overall just a small red arrow to 825th in the world. Game week 14 was the week that Liverpool lost 2-1 to Leeds, and by now Liverpool has already had a run of 3 games where they've lost to Leeds and Forest, and the other one was a 1-0 win against West Ham. So attacking returns from Liverpool were few and far between, so luckily for Ross, Salah managed to nick the goal that Liverpool put past Leeds in the 2-1 win. And aside from that, Trippier, the FPL points machine, continued to take along, and clean sheet points from Guehi, Cancelo and Pope brought Ross to 62 points for the game week, but still a red arrow to around 1.8k in the world. On to the second last game week before the World Cup, and this was a great week for Ross, halving his rank and getting back into the top 1k courtesy of a Julian Alvarez captaincy call. Now we will remember this week as the one where the FPL site crashed and some FPL managers were able to make their transfers, some weren't able to make their transfers, but in general, the decision point was whether to bring KDB in for Salah or take Mitrovic out for Alvarez. So for Ross, he made this third double change of the season and took Foden and Mitrovic out and replaced them with Alvarez and Rashford. So big returns from Captain Alvarez. Salah's haul against Spurs and Trippier's 12-pointer against Southampton all helped Ross to 69 points and a massive green arrow. For the final game week of the season before the World Cup, Game Week 16, unfortunately it wasn't the best for Ross, but he still ended the first half of the season in a really good position around 2k in the world. Now it was a generally low scoring game week on the whole, and Ross only managed 42 points with some 6 to 7 pointers from Castagna, Trippier, Martinelli and Firmino to help cushion the impact of a low score. Now the only transfer that he made this week was to bring Jesus in for Alvarez, and even Jesus didn't manage to bring in any points. So not an ideal game week, but still a rank that is very respectable, ending the first half of the season in 2k overall. So just before we end the video, I thought it'd be interesting for us to take a look at the whole spectrum of players that Ross has owned at some point this season to try and pick out some potential season keepers for the next half of the season. Now, it's no surprise that Trippier, Cancelo, Haaland and Martinelli are all up there, and they've been with Ross throughout the whole 16 game weeks. Now, some notable players I thought I'd single out here are Castagna, who he only owned for the last 7 game weeks before the World Cup, and those happen to be the ones that Castagna really came through. Now, some good returns there. You'll remember the double-digit haul, ticking along with clean sheets as well, so really great pick there. Pascal Gross as well, only 5 game weeks in Ross's team, but he did put up some really good numbers and even a double-digit haul in one of the game weeks as well. So he was transferred in at a really good time. And lastly, who can forget Foden, only in the team for 7 game weeks, but that period of time was actually those game weeks where Foden really popped, especially that hat-trick against United as well. So that's pretty much it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Feel free to rewind and go through some parts in case I went a little too fast. I was afraid this video would run too long, so I think it's pretty alright for this duration. If you guys are still here, thank you so much for watching. I hope it was insightful for you and that you kind of managed to draw some learning points from it. Please do drop a like and subscribe if you enjoy the content, and let's continue to root for Ross and see how high up the ranks he can go, and if he can possibly win FPL even. So that's it for now. Right, I will see you guys in another video very soon. Bye bye.